America 2025, a nation teetering on the edge of political chaos. With Donald Trump back in the White House for a second term, Washington had become a battlefield. The streets of D.C. pulsed with a nation divided, one half celebrating his return, the other calling it the death of democracy. But beneath the headlines, beyond the speeches and the flashing cameras, something far more insidious was unraveling. The so-called progressive movement, once a juggernaut of moral outrage, was beginning to collapse under the weight of its own hypocrisy. The party that preached accountability, justice, and integrity was now drowning in scandal after scandal. And at the heart of it all stood one name, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. For years, AOC had been the face of the radical left, a firebrand, a crusader, a symbol of defiance. She built her career on speeches about fairness and equality, but now the whispers had begun. The kind that didn't just end careers, they brought down entire empires, and there was one man who knew how to listen. Logan Shaw didn't chase headlines, he created them. A veteran investigative journalist at the New York Sentinel, Shaw had a reputation for exposing the untouchable. Corrupt senators, billion-dollar fraud schemes, backroom deals, he had dragged them all into the light. In Washington, the truth wasn't just buried, it was suffocated. But Shaw had a habit of digging deep enough to bring it gasping back to the surface. Even for him, though, this one was different. It started with an email, no sender, no subject. Just a single attachment labeled AOC scandal and one ominous sentence, "Find Miguel Torres before it's too late." Shaw leaned back in his chair, instincts flaring. The name didn't immediately ring a bell, but the document attached did. A few keystrokes later, his screen was filled with something that could set Capitol Hill on fire. AOC, the congresswoman who never missed an opportunity to lecture Americans on law and order, had allegedly hired an illegal immigrant as her campaign's chief of staff, paying him a generous $80,000 a year. Shaw let out a low whistle. Well. If this document was real, it wasn't just a scandal, it was political dynamite. AOC, the self-proclaimed champion of justice, had violated federal law all while standing atop her moral high ground, preaching about ethics and accountability. The hypocrisy was staggering. But Washington was a cesspool of misinformation, and Shaw knew better than to take anything at face value. If this was true, if AOC had truly broken the law as a sitting congresswoman, the fallout would be seismic. And there was only one way to find out. Find Miguel Torres. Whoever sent that email knew something. And Shaw, he wasn't about to let the biggest story of the year slip through his fingers. He cracked his knuckles, opened a new browser tab, and started digging. Washington was about to get very, very messy. Shaw had been in the game long enough to recognize fear, not the loud kind, not the rage-fueled denials or dramatic outbursts. Real fear was quiet. It was in the way people avoided eye contact, the hesitant pauses before answering simple questions, the way their hands gripped coffee cups just a little too tightly. And right now, every single former staffer of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was terrified. In the past 24 hours, Shaw had made dozens of calls, chased leads, knocked on doors. Nothing. Most refused to talk. Some claimed ignorance, a phrase that, in Washington, usually meant they knew far too much. His first call had been to Daniel Green, a former digital strategy aide for AOC's campaign. The guy had picked up on the second ring, but the moment Shaw mentioned Miguel Torres, the line went dead. That was the pattern. The moment Torres' name came up, people shut down. This wasn't just avoidance, it was calculated fear. Shaw sat at the counter of a quiet Georgetown cafe, flipping through his notes. Every scandal had a pattern, a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to the truth. And right now, the pattern was clear. Miguel Torres had been a key figure in AOC's operation. Then, the moment the political winds shifted, he vanished. That wasn't a coincidence. It was deliberate. Then, finally, a break. A new message pinged into Shaw's encrypted inbox. No sender, no signature, just a single line. Miguel left the country the night Trump won. Bogotá, Shaw exhaled slowly, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Well, well. Colombia it was. If Miguel Torres was hiding, it meant someone didn't want him talking. And Logan Shaw, he wasn't in the habit of letting people disappear. Washington, D.C. was built on facades, marble pillars, grand speeches, empty promises, all designed to hide the rot beneath. Truth here wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Sitting in his dimly lit office, Shaw tapped his fingers against his desk, staring at the last message he'd received. Miguel left the country the night Trump won. Bogotá. The pieces were falling into place. Miguel Torres, AOC's former deputy communications director, a man with intimate knowledge of her campaign's inner workings, hadn't just left. He had fled, which meant only one thing. Someone wanted him gone, and now someone wanted Shaw to stop looking for him. He picked up his phone and dialed AOC's press office. Straight to voicemail, again, not surprising. When you're caught with both hands in the cookie jar, the last thing you do is answer the phone. Then, just as he was about to draft an email, a news alert flashed across his screen. Breaking. AOC DISMISSES baseless ALLEGATIONS in press conference. Shaw clicked the link. A grainy livestream buffered before AOC's face filled the screen. Hair perfectly styled, expression sculpted into the righteous indignation of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of victimhood. "This is nothing more than a clerical error," she said, her voice laced with exasperation. "A simple miscommunication that's being twisted into something sinister by right-wing extremists." A clerical error, Shaw exhaled a quiet laugh, right. And the Titanic had a minor navigation issue. This was Washington, D.C. Damage Control 101. Step 1, deny everything. Step 2, frame yourself as the victim. Step 3, turn the narrative against your accusers. Shaw cracked his knuckles and smiled. He'd seen this game before, and he was about to blow it wide open. And just like that, the spin machine roared to life. CNN, MSNBC, the usual suspects rushed to frame the narrative. AOC targeted in politically motivated smear campaign. Right-wing media exploits minor bureaucratic oversight to attack progressive leader. The headlines were predictable, scripted. Shaw wasn't surprised. But what AOC didn't know, what her entire PR team had failed to anticipate, was that the lie was already coming apart at the seams. His phone buzzed just as the press conference wrapped. Anonymous delivery. He retrieved the package himself, scanning the hallway for anything out of place before slicing open the plain brown envelope. Inside was exactly what he expected. The truth. A signed employment contract. Miguel Torres, a name buried deep in AOC's payroll, drawing a comfortable $80,000 a year. A leaked email thread from her senior staff, explicitly warning that hiring an undocumented immigrant was a federal crime. And her response, "We'll handle it, no one will find out." Shaw let out a slow whistle, so much for a clerical error. She knew, she had always known, this wasn't political carelessness, it was calculated deception. And if there was one thing Shaw had learned, it was that the cover-up was always worse than the crime. This was just the beginning. The real question now was who else had their hands dirty. Shaw leaned back in his chair, the dim glow of his desk lamp flickering across the documents spread before him. A signed contract, a damning email, undeniable proof that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez hadn't just broken the law, she'd done it knowingly. If the right people were willing to listen, this story could rip Washington apart, but something wasn't adding up. Miguel Torres hadn't just left the country, he had vanished, and people only disappeared for two reasons. Either they were running, or someone was making sure they stayed gone. That thought lingered as Shaw boarded a red-eye to Bogotá. By the time he stepped out of El Dorado International Airport, the reality of the situation had begun to settle in. The heat pressed against him, thick and humid, as he scanned the unfamiliar streets. Bogotá had a reputation, a place where people came to disappear, to start over, to escape whatever ghosts trailed behind them. And Miguel? Miguel was running from something much bigger than himself. Shaw barely had time to hail a cab before his phone vibrated again. A new message. No sender, no signature, just 6 words: "Get out. Stop looking for Miguel." Shaw exhaled, amused. So that was how this was going to go. Washington thrived on deception, but Bogota was where people went when they didn't want to be found. And yet, Logan Shaw had never been particularly good at taking hints. No official records, no paper trail, just whispers in back alleys, wary glances from bartenders, and phone numbers that led to nowhere. This level of secrecy didn't happen by accident. Someone had buried Miguel Torres. 2 days of chasing ghosts, cashing in favors, and sifting through half-truths finally led to a name, scrawled on a napkin, passed to him by a bartender who didn't ask questions: Barrio Santa Fe. By the time Shaw reached the apartment, the sun had dipped behind the skyline, stretching the slums in long, jagged shadows. The building was a shell of itself, peeling paint, rusted window grates, the kind of place where people didn't want to be found. He knocked once. No answer. Twice. Silence. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. Miguel Torres stood there, hollow-eyed, looking like a man waiting for the inevitable. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." His gaze darted past Shaw's shoulder, scanning the darkness as if expecting someone, or something, to be watching. Shaw didn't wait for an invitation. He pushed inside, shutting the door behind him. The apartment was nearly empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, just a half-packed suitcase in the corner, as if Miguel was ready to vanish again at a moment's notice. "I need the truth," Shaw said, his voice level. "Not the press conference version, the real one." Miguel hesitated, then finally he exhaled, shoulders slumping in resignation. "AOC knew," he admitted. "She knew I was undocumented. She hired me anyway, because I was loyal, because I'd do whatever she asked." Shaw's jaw tightened. "And the paperwork?" Miguel swallowed hard. "Fake. The contract, the social security number, the payroll system. All of it was rigged by her team. A few close insiders made sure I looked clean on paper." It was worse than Shaw had imagined. This wasn't a mistake. It was systematic fraud. Miguel's voice dropped lower. "After Trump won, she told me to lay low, He hesitated, eyes flickering with fear. Shaw took a step closer. "She even what?" Miguel exhaled shakily. "She gave me instructions, how to avoid ICE, how to disappear." His voice dropped even lower. "She helped me get out." Shaw's breath stilled. This wasn't just an employment scandal. This was conspiracy. Collusion. A sitting congresswoman actively working against federal law. And Miguel Torres, he wasn't just a loose end. He was the proof. But proof meant nothing if Miguel didn't live long enough to tell his story. And from the way he kept glancing toward the window, Shaw wasn't the only one who knew that. Miguel hesitated, then reached into the pocket of his worn-out jacket. His fingers trembled as he pulled out a cheap, battered USB drive. The kind you'd expect to find at a gas station checkout, not in the hands of a man carrying evidence that could bring down one of the most powerful politicians in the country. Shaw took it carefully, weighing its significance in his palm. "What's on it?" he asked, already knowing that whatever it was, it would change everything. Miguel exhaled sharply. "A meeting." His voice was barely above a whisper. One that wasn't supposed to be recorded. Shaw didn't hesitate. He pulled out his laptop, inserted the drive, and waited. The screen flickered. Then grainy footage filled the frame, a small, dimly lit conference room. Deep inside AOC's campaign headquarters. The angle low, hidden, likely placed behind a stack of policy binders. The camera captured a tight huddle of senior aides and advisors gathered around a table. And at the center of it all, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She was mid-sentence when the audio kicked in. "We have to be smart about this." Her voice was firm, controlled. A pause. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their chair. "The administration is tightening its grip. If ICE steps up enforcement, some of our people are going to get caught in the net. Another voice tense, we can't afford that kind of exposure. We're already under the microscope. AOC leaned forward, her hands clasped, her expression sharp. We make sure it doesn't happen. Her voice was steady, like she was orchestrating a chess game where every piece was a federal crime waiting to happen. We give them what they need to stay off the radar: legal resources, safe housing, transit options. We keep them moving. Shaw's stomach tightened. This wasn't rhetoric. This wasn't empty political posturing. This was active coordination to subvert federal immigration law. Miguel's voice was barely a whisper. She called it the protection network. Shaw didn't look away from the screen. He didn't need to. The weight of what he had just heard was already settling in. This wasn't a slip-up. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was premeditated, deliberate, unmistakable. And if the world saw this, AOC's career wouldn't just end, it would go up in flames. Shaw had never been the kind of journalist to sit on a nuclear bomb and wait for permission to drop it. And make no mistake, this was a nuclear bomb. Back in D.C., sitting in his dimly lit apartment, Shaw replayed the footage one last time. The grainy image flickered across his laptop screen. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, seated at a table, not just breaking federal law, but strategizing how to keep doing it. And yet somehow, CNN still had time for another segment on Trump's golf schedule. Shaw exhaled, rubbing his temples. He knew exactly how this was going to go. The mainstream media wasn't going to touch this with a 10-foot pole. And sure enough, the moment he reached out to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and MSNBC, the responses were almost laughably predictable. Unverified footage, selective editing, baseless accusations. Oh, but when it was a rumor about Trump's tax returns, suddenly unnamed sources and anonymous leaks were the holy grail of journalism. Shaw had expected this. Hell, he'd counted on it. Because if there was one thing legacy media had never learned, it was this. You can't silence the internet. He cracked his knuckles, logged into an encrypted server, and hit upload. Within minutes, the video was live. Twitter, Rumble, Truth Social, every platform where corporate censorship hadn't yet wrapped its tentacles around free speech. And the reaction? Explosive. AOC caught on tape, illegally aiding migrants to evade ICE. The biggest scandal of AOC's career, will she resign? Breaking. Leaked video shows AOC organizing illegal protection network. Within an hour, the clip had racked up millions of views. Within 3, it was the #1 trending topic in the country. And within 6, the political war had officially begun. Ted Cruz had been waiting for something like this. Sitting in his Senate office, Ted Cruz scrolled through his phone, watching the firestorm unfold. A slow smile tugged at his lips. For years, he had battled Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the political arena, watching her parade around Capitol Hill, lecturing America on law, order, and justice, all while playing by her own rules. But now she'd been caught. And this time, not even her beloved activist press could shield her. Cruz stood, adjusted his tie, and walked straight into the lion's den, the Senate floor. When the cameras started rolling, he didn't hesitate. I rise today to address something that should concern every single American. His voice was firm, calculated. The shocking and indisputable proof that a sitting member of Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has knowingly and willfully violated federal law. The chamber fell silent. The footage is clear. The words came from her own mouth. This is not speculation. This is not a right-wing conspiracy. This is reality. A pause, he let the weight of it settle. She hired an illegal immigrant, paid him $80,000 a year, and when her own team warned her about the legal consequences, she ignored them. Cruz leaned forward. Why? A beat, because she believes the law doesn't apply to her. Across the aisle, Democrats were seething. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others avoided eye contact. They knew he was right. And let's not forget, this is the same congresswoman who has spent years preaching about holding the powerful accountable. He let out a dry chuckle. Well, I say it's time we take her advice. A wave of conservative voices erupted behind him. The headlines were already forming. Ted Cruz demands investigation into AOC scandal. GOP senators call for immediate action after damning video surfaces. But Cruz wasn't finished. He turned to the cameras, addressing the millions watching at home. If a Republican had been caught on tape breaking federal law, what do you think would happen? Would the New York Times ignore it? Would CNN pretend it wasn't newsworthy? He shook his head. No. There would be calls for resignation, arrest, impeachment. The outrage would be endless. Another pause, but when it's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Suddenly it's a clerical error. Suddenly it's taken out of context. His voice sharpened. Well, enough is enough. And then came the hammer. I am officially calling for a full congressional investigation into Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's illegal activities, and I urge the Department of Justice to take immediate action. No member of Congress, Republican or Democrat, is above the law. The chamber exploded. Democrats scrambled. Progressive activists lost their minds on Twitter, and conservative media, they had just been handed the biggest political gift of the year. Fox News, Breitbart, The Daily Wire, they were all over it. This isn't a smear campaign. This is the truth, Tucker Carlson declared that night. And if the DOJ doesn't act, it will prove what we've always known, that the system is rigged to protect the elites. Ben Shapiro didn't hold back either. She's caught red-handed, no spin, no excuses. This is corruption at its finest. And if she isn't investigated, it's because the people in power are just as guilty as she is. Meanwhile, on Truth Social, Donald Trump couldn't resist weighing in. AOC caught committing crimes. Biggest hypocrite in Congress. When will the FBI raid her house like they did to me? In less than 24 hours, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had gone from the darling of the progressive movement to the biggest political liability in Washington. And Logan Shaw, he wasn't done yet, because if there was one thing he had learned in this business, it was that the fall was always the most interesting part of the story. Shaw had seen political collapses before. Some happened like an avalanche, fast, loud, and brutal. Others, like this one, were slower, more insidious. AOC wasn't done fighting, not yet, but Shaw knew the real danger wasn't the scandal itself. It was what happened next. Because when the first line of defense crumbled, politicians like Ocasio-Cortez did what they always did. They doubled down, and sure enough, within 24 hours, the press conference was set. She wasn't going to explain. She wasn't going to admit to anything. She was going to go to war. Shaw sat back in his chair, watching the live stream as she took the podium. Her expression was carefully composed. The corners of her mouth just tight enough to suggest frustration, but not fear. I refuse to sit back and allow my name to be dragged through the mud by a known liar and right-wing extremist operative, she declared, her eyes locked on the cameras. Shaw exhaled slowly. It was just beginning. There it was. Step 1, attack the messenger. Politicians never argued the facts, only the people exposing them. AOC wasn't talking about the video, the one where she openly discussed evading federal immigration laws. She wasn't addressing the damning emails or the leaked documents. She was making this about him. Logan Shaw is not a journalist, she declared, her voice rising with carefully measured indignation. He is a known associate of extremist networks that peddle misinformation and conspiracy theories. Shaw snorted, cute. If she had bothered to check his record, she'd know he had exposed corruption on both sides of the aisle. But this wasn't about facts. It was about reframing the conversation. And the media, they were all too happy to fall in line. By the time she finished, CNN and MSNBC were already running with it. AOC fights back against right-wing smear campaign. Far-right operative spreads disinformation to attack progressive leader. But there was one small problem. The evidence wasn't fake. And no amount of indignant monologues was going to make it go away. The cracks started subtly at first. Twitter activists rallied, hashtags trended. Her usual army of defenders did their best to shift the narrative. But something was off. Shaw recognized it almost instantly. Where were the big guns? Where was Nancy Pelosi? Where was Chuck Schumer? The establishment wasn't rushing to her defense. Instead, they were waiting, watching, calculating. And then, like clockwork, the real shift began. Politico dropped an anonymous insider piece, DC code for "we're seeing if we can get away with throwing her under the bus." Then came the House leadership statement. "We take all allegations of ethical violations seriously and will allow the investigation to proceed without political interference." Translation: you're on your own. The next 48 hours were brutal. CNN, once her biggest cheerleader, started softening their coverage. Not a full pivot, not yet, but enough to give the Democratic establishment room to maneuver. Then, one by one, the party's top players started peeling away. The most damning moment: a senior Democratic senator, off the record, of course, told a reporter that the situation was deeply concerning and should be fully investigated. AOC fired back, calling it a betrayal by the establishment that has always sought to undermine progressive leadership. Shaw almost felt bad for her. Almost, because in less than a week she had gone from "this is fake news" to "this is a political hit job" to "this is proof the Democratic Party is corrupt." And by the time the second senator made a non-committal remark about waiting for all the facts to come out, the writing was on the wall. The party wasn't defending her anymore. They were distancing themselves. And in Washington, that was just another way of saying the end was near. The Democratic Party had a long and storied tradition of throwing its problem children overboard the moment they became a liability. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, once their prized progressive warrior, was now sinking fast. And Ted Cruz, he had the metaphorical anvil ready to send her straight to the bottom. The Senate chamber was packed. Not because people didn't know what was coming, but because they wanted to watch it happen in real time. Cruz took his time walking to the podium, moving with the confidence of a man who had just been handed the easiest political win of his career. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and let the weight of the moment settle before delivering his opening salvo. "Mr. President, today this chamber must answer a question that will define whether we are a nation of laws or a nation of hypocrisy." A measured pause. "For years, we've been told by the left that no one is above the law. We've been subjected to endless lectures about integrity, fairness, and accountability. Yet today, we stand here confronting undeniable proof that one of their own has willfully, knowingly, and repeatedly broken federal law." Cruz turned slowly, his eyes sweeping across the room. "If this Congress refuses to act, if the Department of Justice refuses to prosecute, then let's be honest with the American people. The law doesn't apply to everyone. It only applies to those who don't belong to the right political club." The weight of that sentence hung in the air. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't just commit an error in judgment. She committed a premeditated violation of federal law. She knowingly hired an illegal immigrant, ignored warnings from her own advisors, and when the walls started closing in, she lied to the American public. His voice hardened, and now, as the evidence piles up, what do we see? Silence. Deflection. The Senate chamber sat in absolute stillness, because everyone knew what came next. The same media outlets that spent years breathlessly dissecting tax documents and phone calls were suddenly uninterested in a sitting congresswoman orchestrating a cover-up. A slight smirk, "Well, I say enough." Cruz turned to the cameras, his voice cutting through the chamber like a scalpel. "This is not a political dispute. This is a criminal investigation, and the Department of Justice has two choices. Either it upholds the law as it was written, or it proves that law enforcement is nothing more than a tool for the politically connected." His tone grew sharper, more deliberate. If a Republican had done this, if a conservative member of this body had knowingly violated labor laws, misused government funds, and obstructed an investigation, what would have happened? Would the FBI be knocking down their door? Would we be watching a primetime CNN special on the threat to democracy? A brief pause. Then his voice dropped heavier now. The American people are watching, they see the double standard, they see the corruption, and they will not accept it. Within hours, the pressure was unbearable. The Department of Justice, already under fire for its selective enforcement of the law, had no choice. AOC was officially under federal investigation. The charges: violating federal immigration and labor laws by employing an undocumented worker, misusing government funds to sustain her illegal operation, obstructing a federal investigation by attempting to bury the evidence. For all the talk about protecting democracy, AOC had done a damn fine job of violating it herself. And just like that, the unstoppable progressive icon had become a cautionary tale. The fallout was swift. But the Republican Party wasn't about to let this moment go to waste. Donald Trump wasted zero time weighing in. This is exactly what I've been saying for years. The Democrats pretend to be the party of law and order, but look at them. Corrupt cheaters, and now they got caught. Sad. Fox News ran wall-to-wall coverage, breaking down every lie, every contradiction, every self-inflicted wound in AOC's unraveling career. Ben Shapiro went into full analytical mode, speed-talking his way through every blatant hypocrisy in AOC's public record. Tucker Carlson. He was practically grinning as he narrated her downfall like a Shakespearean tragedy, except, as he put it, with fewer poetic monologues and a lot more whining on Twitter. And Ted Cruz. He wasn't done. The message to America is clear. If you're politically connected, you can break the law and expect to walk away untouched. But we're not going to let that happen. We will not allow the Department of Justice to drag its feet. We will not allow the media to bury this story. And we will not allow the left to rewrite the rules in their favor, yet again. A long, deliberate pause. The rule of law either applies to everyone, or it applies to no one. And if this body fails to act, history will remember this moment, not as a triumph of justice, but as the day Washington officially abandoned it. The chamber erupted. And just like that, the Republican Party had its biggest political win of the decade. AOC's collapse sent the border crisis back into the spotlight. The GOP pushed forward tougher immigration laws. And America had just witnessed one of the greatest political implosions in modern history. Shaw sat in the back of a DC bar, swirling the last inch of whiskey in his glass, watching the headlines roll across the screen like the end credits of a bad movie. It was done, or at least that's what they wanted him to believe, because something wasn't adding up. AOC had been reckless, sure, but she wasn't a fool. She had been untouchable for years. A progressive firebrand backed by billion-dollar donor networks, activist groups, and the very machine that had propelled her from bartender to congresswoman. So why had they let her fall? Why had her own party treated her like a defective product, tossing her aside without so much as a fight? Shaw pulled out his phone, scrolling through his notes, the pieces rearranging themselves in his mind. The moment the scandal had broken, Democratic leadership had gone radio silent. The same people who had defended AOC through every misstep, every controversy, every outrageous policy proposal, had suddenly lost her number. No coordinated damage control, no deflections, just silence. It wasn't self-preservation, it was strategy. They had known, not just about the scandal, about the timing. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't just one woman's downfall. It was a move on the chessboard. Shaw exhaled slowly, shutting off his phone. The bar around him buzzed with laughter, with half-drunk political aides celebrating the latest shake-up in Washington. But he wasn't celebrating, because if there was one thing he knew, it was this. The real story never ended with the first fall. It was about who was waiting to take their place. If you want to uncover who's really pulling the strings behind the biggest political scandals of our time, make sure you subscribe. Turn on notifications because this is just the beginning. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.